Hello everyone! For this video, I plan to show you my current process on how I make mashups. First things first, I'd like to point out that this tutorial right here is meant for those who have already watched the first video, or rather just for those who already know about how pitches and BPMs work, as well as the different types of beats of songs and all that stuff. This tutorial right here is meant for the actual mashupping process, as opposed to all the stuff you should figure out prior to it, if that makes sense. So another reason I really wanted to make this video is because while I do have my live stream videos where I make mashups with Bufo's mixes, for one, I don't really take the time to really slow down and show off my process to people. And two, since a lot of those videos are pretty old now, sorry about that, my method back then is very outdated. But either way, I want to take this opportunity to really take things slow and show off some little tips and tricks, as well as share stuff I've learned throughout the years. So as usual, I have an abundance of my own mashup ideas, so what I'm going to do here is simply pick one of my ideas and go through my normal process of making the mashup, but I'm also going to take the time to explain what exactly I'm doing and why I do what I do. So in this case, my guinea pig here is Evil Twins from Crash to Insanity and Find Your Flame from Sonic Frontiers. Which, yes, I understand this has technically already been done. My buddy Super Smash Brandon posted this through Rave, but thankfully I feel like my version would sound different enough to share, so why not? And as mentioned before, this video here is meant for those who have already watched the first video, or for those who just already know about how BPMs and pitches work. So we're not really going to dwell on that too much here in this video. All we know is that right now, these are our BPMs. And don't let the vastly different numbers intimidate you. While Evil Twins is 87 BPM here, we can technically just double that number to be 174 BPM, which is much closer to 150. Or heck, just split 150 in half and consider this 75 BPM, which is close to that as well. Either way works. Either way, I usually just drag the files directly from my BPM software into Audacity. Either that, or you can also use the import audio option, or just pull up your music folder, select the files, and drag them onto Audacity too. So now we have our two tracks that we want to work on. So first things first, my personal top priority is always making the necessary pitch changes first. Because after that, we're going to make tempo changes to properly sync up the two songs. And if I try to sync up songs that don't have the same pitch, oh boy, that triggers me so much. But again, that's just me. You're free to start mashups any way you want. Once again, I spoke about pitches in my last tutorial video, so I'm not really going to go into details there, but I just know that Evil Twins is C sharp minor, while Find Your Flame is D sharp minor, which really isn't too big of a gap when you really think about it. From there, that already gives you three options on what to do for your mashup. Number one, you can change Evil Twins from C sharp up to D sharp to match Find Your Flame. Number two, you can change Find Your Flame from D sharp down to C sharp to match Evil Twins. Or three, you can change Evil Twins from C sharp up to D, and then also change Find Your Flame from D sharp down to D to reach the middle ground there. Ultimately, this all comes down to personal preference. I've had plenty of times where I tried one option, but then I found that another option sounded a lot cooler, so I tried that instead. But basically, any of those options will match the pitches together in this scenario, and that's all that matters. In this case, reaching the middle ground isn't a bad idea, but I think I'm actually going to go with option 1 and see how that sounds. So for that, I'm just gonna, well, you want to make sure you either just select the entire track of Evil Twins, or if you click anywhere here, whatever, the entire track is automatically selected. You're going to want to go to Effect and then Change Pitch. Alright, so in this case, Evil Twins is C sharp, so we want to put that here. And we want to change it to D sharp, so we put it in this box here. But we also want to make sure that it doesn't go too high or too low. We want to make sure that it recognizes the correct amount of steps, which in this case, from C sharp to D sharp, 2 is the correct amount of steps. How to know that is, well, since I've personally learned pitches through piano lessons, I think of it like a giant piano. From the C sharp key, 2 steps forward is the D sharp key. So that's how I understand that there. So we could just hit apply here and be done with that, but one thing I personally recommend is using the high quality stretching option here. If you just hit apply without using that, sometimes it can make the song sound a bit choppy in some areas, though again, that also depends on how big of a change you're making to a song. And you can feel free to experiment with that on and off to your heart's content, using this or not using this, and figuring out what feels right just for you. I personally always like using the high quality stretching. So then just hit apply. And it does take just a bit longer than if you were to just hit apply without the high quality stretching, but I'll just fast forward through that. Alright, so now the only pitch change needed for this entire mashup is finished. But before we go on to the next step of syncing the songs together, one little detail I'd like to point out is, by looking at the sound waves of these two songs, I think you can already tell that Find Your Flame is the louder song of the two. So sometimes I like to make a little adjustment there and make sure it's not overpowering Evil Twins the entire time I'm trying to sync the songs together. So you want to have the entire track selected. And there is this option right here. This is a volume bar that you can use, and you can lower it or raise it. But the thing is, when you use the bar, it doesn't really affect the overall sound waves, how they look. It only affects how they sound, and that kind of triggers me a little bit. So what I like to personally use is the Amplify option, because you can be a lot more specific with the volume changes, and it also affects how the sound waves look. But basically, you can just experiment around with different numbers and see what works for you there. I obviously want to lower the volume of this. I'm going to do -2 and see how that looks. Yeah, it looks a little bit better. We'll just see how that goes from there. But anyway, to start things off, we now need to change the tempo to one of these songs. So we've already established that Evil Twins is 87 or 174 BPM, while Find Your Flame is 150 or 75 BPM. I consider Evil Twins to be the faster of the two songs. So for this mashup, we're going to leave the tempo to Evil Twins alone, and then we're going to focus on changing the tempo of Find Your Flame. So for that, you're going to want to go back to Effect, and then change tempo. And I already kind of covered this in my last tutorial video, but beats per minute is BPM. So all we need to do is 150. And then we want to change it to 174. And just like the change pitch option, it also has high quality stretching. But when it comes to changing the tempo, I don't use this that often. I only use this if I'm making like some very major tempo changes. Like I'm saying over 20 maybe. 20 to 25. If it's like over that, then I'll start using the high quality stretching. But again, that's completely my preference. You're welcome to try whatever you want to try. But I think this is good without the high quality stretching. Of course, I could always change that if necessary, but we're going to apply that. And now Find Your Flame should be the exact same tempo as Evil Twins. So now that we've got our pitches and tempos figured out, this is where we reach the hardest part of mashupping, and that's properly syncing songs. So first of all, we're going to want to know how to properly zoom in and out of tracks. I just hold Control and then scroll, and then you can zoom in and out to your heart's content. It's much easier than using these buttons that you have to keep clicking on multiple times in order for them to work. But yeah, we want to zoom in, and we want to, of course, make sure our tracks start at the same time. So you click around approximately where your track begins. You don't have to like zoom in extremely far and say, oh, it has to be this precise dot. No, I'm not that picky. As long as you click around the starting area, it should work. So we want to click there, and then we want to create a little split in the track. You're going to want to hold Control and press I, and you're going to want to remember that because we're going to be using that a lot. If for any reason you hit Control plus I and nothing happens, you just go to Edit, and then Audio Clips, and then Split. So that's just a little detail there. So we want to go ahead and do the same thing to Evil Twins. I think I might have it starting there. But either way, we have the starting point to both of our tracks. And what you're going to want to do is, well, first things first, I am using the newest update of Audacity. Yes, I finally gave in. I was at an older version for so long, but I finally gave in to the newer version, so that's just something to keep in mind. There's some very, very slight differences between this and the old version. I'll try to mention that where I can, but one of those differences is you select the entire track, and you can see your little mouse icon change when you hover up here. And if you click, you can move the entire track that way. Whereas in the old version, and I'll show a little video clip of how you move tracks in the old version, but in this new version, that's how you move tracks. So overall, now that we have determined the starting point of both songs and have them start at the same time, you might be thinking, well, there we go. They're the same pitch, the same tempo, when they even start at the same time. What more could we possibly ask for? But this is where creative liberty comes in. You see, we could just make the simple BPM and pitch changes, slap the two songs together, and call it a day. And while in some rare cases that can actually work for a mashup, we're obviously not going to end it here in this case. My particular process dives much deeper into that, and I'll show you how. So this is where my new methods come into play. Now, I touched on this briefly in my first tutorial video when it comes to BPMs. But what you're going to want to do is click off the 2 tracks, which I already did. Then go to Generate and go to Rhythm Track. I don't remember if any old versions it said Click Track, but Click Track, Rhythm Track, either way. Here you just put in the correct BPM of your mashup, which in this case, we sped up Find Your Flame to match Evil Twins, which was 174. 87 could also work, but I'm just going to go with 174 for the heck of it. And as mentioned before, this has to do with what kind of beat your mashup is, which I already know that both songs are 4 beats, so I just leave that alone. And as far as everything else, you can just ignore. This just has to do with like the length of your rhythm track, which I usually have it at 100, but you're free to make it longer or shorter or whatever. And as far as this goes, you can either just leave it be or copy what I got here. These are just my personal settings. But anyway, after that, you click Generate, and you should have something that looks like this. It's pretty much just a simple drum beat that goes along with the BPM of the mashup. So I'll play an example here. Just a simple beat going on there. And this is also extremely helpful in determining whether a song has an inconsistent BPM or not. But in this case, we're going to be using this rhythm track for a different purpose entirely. So what you're going to want to do with this rhythm track here is make it so it starts at the same time as these tracks. And since we have a split already at the beginning of the tracks, it should be easy for it to snap into place there. And then next what we do is we want to select this entire rhythm track here, and then you're going to want to hold Control Alt and then press J. If that also doesn't work for you for whatever reason, basically you just go to Edit, Audio Clips, and then Detach at Silences, which I don't know whether this is a default setting or not, but that's the setting I have for myself. So now we have our rhythm track split up at every single beat. And that may not look like much, but this is the whole foundation of how I make my mashups nowadays, because this allows me to properly and easily split up each song into various sections. So obviously, when we listen to our mashup, we don't want to hear this weird drum beat in the background. So what you're going to do is make sure you have the entire track selected, and then hit this button up here, Silence Audio Selection. That way the clips are still there for when we need them, but the audio itself won't be a problem. Now, it may seem like I'm taking things really slow right now. I mean, we're already past the 10-minute mark. But again, I'm just going slow on purpose to properly show off how and why I do certain things. And as someone who's already made hundreds of mashups, of course, it's not like this process actually takes me 10 minutes to do every single time. Once you understand what you're doing and have it memorized, it's actually a really quick process. But now we're on to the more fun part. Well, fun to me, anyway, personally. And that's dividing songs into sections. Now, I usually multitask at this part, bouncing between the 2 tracks to split off different sections, but since I'm trying to show off how this works, I'm just going to stick with 1 track at a time, starting with the Evil Twins. So conveniently enough, the Evil Twins theme is probably one of, if not the best example I can think of, when it comes to a song that not only has different sections, but it's really easy to determine when it changes to a different section. So first off, it has a little intro. So we can see that the intro approximately ends here. And that's why having this beat track here is so important, because it serves as a guide for the proper place to divide a track. So we want to do it here. And then we're going to want to leave a little split there. So this right here is our intro. And now we're on to the next section. So now you can see that that section has ended and it's going on to a new section with a little chorus of sorts. So right here, you can see that right here is approximately where it changes into the next section. So we put a little split there. Alright, so now it's changing to a different section, and right here is approximately where this section begins. Right here is approximately where that section ends, and there's a little new section. And yes, this following section sounds a bit similar to this one, but it has a little bit of a faster paced drum beat. So I consider this a different section from that. And we can see right here is where it changes into the next section. Bit of a slower paced section. Right here. Now we're getting into the very final section. And this section is pretty much repetitive all the way until the end, where it has a little beat that mimics the intro beat. Although we're running out of space with our rhythm track, so in that case I get rid of that, go back to the very beginning, and then generate a new rhythm track that's slightly longer. Put it in my info. I was working on something else earlier. Let's try 150. Yeah, that looks good enough. That way it compensates for Find Your Flame as well. And do the Control-Alt-J again, and silence the track again, and boom, there you go. So let's look at the ending here. Yeah, it's just the intro beat again. So, yep. So we can determine, starts there, put a little split there, and there you have it. We now have successfully divided the Evil Twins into its various sections. So then, all that's left to do is do the same for Find Your Flame. So because I don't want to waste too much time talking about where to divide tracks into different sections, since it ultimately varies between track to track, I already went ahead and divided Find Your Flame into its own sections. And now, finally, it's here where we blend the appropriate parts together. And this is where you can really have fun moving around and copying and pasting different sections of the songs to match each other. But of course, I'm going to show you how I would personally go about constructing this mashup myself. So to start out, this is the intro for Evil Twins, and this is our intro for Find Your Flame. As you can see, the intro for Find Your Flame is a little bit longer than Evil Twins, so this is where copying and pasting comes in. So in this case, you can copy and paste the intro section to play twice. And sometimes there's a copy button up here, but it all depends on where you have your tools. I think you can view you can view a cut, copy, paste toolbar. I don't really normally use this, but you can if it makes things easier for you. I usually just highlight the track and press Control-C, and then use the right arrow key, click that, so that way your little cursor is right at the end of the section. And then you're going to want to use Control+V to paste it. Now, if for any reason you try to paste a section somewhere and you get this message, all you have to do to fix that is go to Edit and go to your Preferences, and then go to your, I already have it here, but you go to Tracks Behaviors under Tracks, and then editing a clip can move other clips. And that should solve that problem right away. But anyway, now we have our two intros to match. Alright, and as you can see, these two sections we have are conveniently the same length. So as far as the next section goes, Find Your Flame has this little section before it goes on to the chorus, whereas this next part of the Evil Twins is what I consider to be the chorus. So I want this part and this part to start at the same time, but I don't want to remove this little section here. So instead, I'm going to try to repeat some of this section to go on top of this section so I can have these two sections start at the same time, if that makes sense. So how I would go about that is take this section, do the same thing, copy it, paste it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this here, and I'm going to remove this little section. Just press delete or backspace to remove a section, easy as pie. So for this next section, this is where you can definitely tell that mashups can be made in a variety of ways. It all basically comes down to personal preference on which parts of songs you want to match with the other. So for me, I think what I'm going to do here is split the track there and remove that little part of Evil Twins so that way these sections here are the same length. And for this in particular, this part of the Evil Twins really builds up, and I think it would be really cool if it built up to the chorus of Find Your Flame again, which is right here in this section. So I want to extend this part a little bit to end where this part begins. So what I'm going to do here is split off there, and then I'm going to copy this and paste it there. So that way all three of these parts work together. So when it comes to the chorus of Find Your Flame again, I personally don't really want to use this part of the Evil Twins with the chorus because I feel this part is a bit slower paced. So what I'm going to do here is basically take this section of the Evil Twins that I played when the chorus of Find Your Flame played for the first time. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it. Well, no, I'm not going to paste it there. I'm going to highlight this track, press the left key so that way it's right before that. And I'm going to paste that there so that way it plays with the chorus a second time. And we've already heard how that sounds, so next section. I actually don't know if I want to use this section with the Evil Twins. If anything, I would use it with the end since the ending is also a bit slower paced. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move this out of the way. And actually, if I move this section here, this is the same length as these two sections. So if anything, I could probably remove this little section and then, hey, how about that? They end around the same time, so I think this might be the way I do it. And basically that's the end of that mashup. Pretty much the next step after that is volume balance. As you can tell, like the ending here, for example, this is obviously a much quieter part. So what you do here is like select this part, and then use the Amplify option. And one thing I forgot to mention is another difference between this volume bar here and the Amplify option is this volume bar here on the side. It affects the entire track and not various sections, whereas in this case, you can select a various section, press Amplify, and you can only affect the volume for that particular section. Sometimes it'll give you suggestions, like this random number popped up. I mean, I can apply that, and I would still adjust it even further, like, let's do -2 or something, and then maybe it sounds a little better. But yeah, I'm not going to go into detail there as far as volume balance. If I'm completely honest, volume balancing is my least favorite part of mashupping. In fact, that's why sometimes I often have a friend who helps me with that. But other than that, this mashup is pretty much done. So obviously we don't need our rhythm track anymore, but one last thing I'd like to mention before I move on is if you ever need to get rid of a split for whatever reason, this is also something that's different between the new version of Audacity and the older version. But for the newest version that I'm currently using right now, all you have to do is select where your split is. And you can select multiple at a time, of course. But you select where your split is, and then Audacity's default setting should be Control+J. And again, if that doesn't work for you, you go to Edit, Audio Clips, and then Join. For me, since I use it so often, I just have it set to J instead of Control+J, but whatever works for you, that's just for me. But anyway, you hit that, and then the split should be gone, and it should have these two sections together. Whereas for the old version of Audacity here, all you have to do is simply click on the split, and then it'll vanish. Not sure why they changed that in the new version, but that's how it works. So if for any reason you want to make a certain effect be any sort of key and change the default settings, you just go to Edit, then Preferences, and then go to Shortcuts, and then you'll see all the effects here, as well as the keys that are related to that effect. So if you ever want to change one, you obviously have Name clicked, and you search for the name of the effect you want to change the key to, which in this case, if it's the Join effect, you go Join. It should be this one here. And as you can see, I have it set to J, but if you ever want to change that, just click on it, click here, and then just hit whatever key you want to change it to. Whether it just be J or Control+J. I like to have it as J, and then just hit Set, and OK, and you're good to go. So ignoring the mashup now, I have some little tips to share when it comes to editing single music tracks, not necessarily mashups. Some of you may already know this, but if you don't, I have a folder full of songs I've edited specifically for mashups. This includes making songs that are multiple pitches be one single pitch all the way through, or cutting off little sections of songs so that way they'll flow much better. And the way that I do that is also through that little rhythm track that I used for my mashup back there. Let me just tell you, ever since I discovered that rhythm track stuff, it personally made my music editing process a lot easier. So I'll show you another example here as to how I edit measures of certain tracks using that rhythm track. Big Arms from Sonic Generations is a good example of that because it has certain measures that I cut out, but also certain measures that I copy and paste to help the song flow better. So this song has a couple of moments where either one little part extends a bit too long, or there's a bit of an awkward pause in some areas, and I'll show an example of both. So for little moments like that, the easiest thing for me is I just get rid of them entirely if necessary. Another example of one here. But there's also an example of a little section that instead of removing it, I actually copy and paste it. It's this one here. That way, if you're able to remove the split there, you can see that this part is the same length as the parts around it. So I feel like that makes sense. It's not necessarily something you need to do. You could just remove it or just ignore it or whatever. But for me, personally, it's just really satisfying. So that's how I edit measures in tracks, by cutting parts out or copying and pasting parts. Overall, the best part is, after deleting certain parts or copying and pasting certain parts, you don't have to worry about deleting too much or too little, or pasting too much or too little, because we already properly split up the sections using our rhythm track here that's split at every single beat. So you don't have to worry about disrupting the BPM there, and that's what makes this so darn helpful. And this same process works very well for pitch changes too. If you're working with a track that changes pitch at some point, all you need to do is divide the song into the sections where the pitch changes, which in this case I have Spear of Justice from Undertale as an example. It starts with G minor here, then changes the G sharp minor for this entire section, and then this ending section changes back to G minor. So for my edited version that I have shared in my folder, what I did was I changed these two sections from G minor to G sharp minor to match this big one. Of course, you could also change this big section to be G minor to match these two sections, but because this is the longer section, I felt it only made sense if the entire track was the same pitch as the longer section. That's just me. So basically, all you would need to do there to make the necessary pitch changes is highlight the selection, go to your change pitch option, and then go from G up to G sharp, which in this case it accidentally said I wanted to go down the G sharp, but that isn't correct because it should just be one whole step up to G sharp, because we're thinking back about the piano, of course. And in the case of changing the pitch to a section of a song, you're always going to want to use the high quality stretching option. Because if you don't use it, and I'll show you what happens if you don't. This is before the pitch change, and this is after. See how the track moved ever so slightly? Not to mention it adds this little moment of silence here for some reason. See, if we were to use the high quality stretching effect, as you can see, the waveforms look a little different, but the audio itself never moves. It's still in sync with our rhythm track here. And that's why if you're going to change the pitch to a section, I always recommend using the high quality stretching option. Because then, now we know that despite the pitch changes, it still doesn't disrupt our BPM. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to cover in this video, I believe. That's pretty much my current process on how to make a mashup, as well as how I make simple edits to certain songs and everything. So yeah, what really makes it different from my previous method is the use of that rhythm track and having it be split at each beat in order to act as my guide and dividing up sections of songs to mix together or cutting out certain sections. And yeah, overall, it's been extremely helpful for me. So in the end, I really hope that showing off my new process here helps anyone who is curious on how I do things, or curious on how to get started making mashups with Audacity. Once again, if you have any questions regarding finding BPMs or pitches of tracks, I'll leave a link to my first tutorial video, which pretty much covered all of that. And also, if you didn't already know, I have a designated BPM pitch list of a bunch of songs I've used throughout the years, which I always leave a link to that in the description of all my videos as well. It's funny, I did think about making another mashup and using that as yet another example on how I make mashups, but this video is already pretty long enough, and I didn't want to make it be too long, and I'm hoping soon enough that Bufo's Mixes and I can do another live stream whenever we have time, since, yeah, it's been quite a long time, and once again, I apologize for that. Life just gets in the way, you know? So for now, I think that pretty much marks the end of this video then. Once again, I'm sorry if I'm not the best at explaining things, and if I've left anyone more confused than ever, but I hope at the very least I was able to help someone out. So with this long-awaited tutorial video out of the way, I hope you all have a great day, and goodbye.